I was sitting on my front porch sipping a cup of black coffee when it happened. A white BMW with flashy gold rims barreled down my long gravel driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. Before I could even stand, a woman in a tight red business suit and high heels stormed out of the car, waving a stack of papers over her head. "You need to vacate this property immediately," she screamed. "I bought it fair and square. This ranch is mine now." I blinked, still half in disbelief. "I'm a 60-year-old retired Army sergeant, and this ranch has been in my family for 120 years. My great-granddaddy built it with his bare hands, and the deed sits locked up in my safe inside the house." The woman stomped right up to my porch like she owned the place, ignoring the giant no trespassing signs posted all along the fence line. I stood up slowly, towering over her with my 6.2 Leo frame. "Paul pligotiam." "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice calm and even like I'd learned to do back in the service, "you are trespassing. I suggest you turn around, get in your car, and leave before things get messy." She actually laughed. "Oh, please," she said, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. "You're just some old man squatting here. I have a buyer lined up for this property already. Either you sign the papers or I'll have you removed." The gall of it left me speechless for a second. Before I could respond, she slapped the stack of papers down on the porch railing and jabbed her manicured finger at them. "I'm being generous by offering you a small relocation fee," she added, her voice dripping with fake kindness. "Otherwise, the HOA will step in and handle it." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some random realtor. She was tied up with the new homeowners association that had sprouted up in the area after a developer bought the land across the highway. They were trying to gobble up every ranch and farm for miles to build luxury condos and golf courses. But my ranch wasn't part of any HOA, and it never would be. I leaned closer, close enough for her perfume to sting my nose, and said very clearly, "Get off my land." Her face turned beet red. "You'll regret this," she shrieked before stomping back to her BMW. She revved her engine and sped off, dust swirling in her wake. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I stood there on the porch for a long while after she was gone, staring down at the so-called purchase agreement she'd left behind, my hands clenched into fists. Something told me this. Woman wasn't just going to take no for an answer, and as much as I wanted to believe it was just a one-time incident, deep down I knew better. Deep down I knew better. The real storm was only just beginning. The ranch had been my safe haven for decades, after 22 years in the Army, seeing the worst the world had to offer. All I ever wanted was peace and wide-open skies, neighbors around. Here respected that. Most of them were old-timers like me, folks who understood that land wasn't just dirt. It was blood, sweat, and memory. So the idea that some high-heeled city woman could waltz in and think she could push me out with a fancy BMW and a stack of fake papers boiled my blood. I grabbed the agreement, took it inside, and locked it in my safe next to my deed. If she came back with the law, I wanted to be ready. Days passed quietly after that, just how I liked it. I spent my time tending to the cattle, fixing up a chicken coop that a coyote had gotten into, and enjoying the crisp spring mornings. But peace doesn't last forever. One afternoon, I was down at the barn repairing a busted water line when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel again. I wiped my hands on my jeans, grabbed my hat, and stepped outside. Sure enough, there she was again, the realtor, with two men in suits this time. They didn't even bother knocking. They marched right up like they owned the place, pushing open the gate without a second thought. "You were warned," the realtor said, smiling smugly. "These men are here to finalize the paperwork. You need to sign now, or we'll escalate things legally." I crossed my arms over my chest. "You're trespassing again. Last warning, get off my land." One of the suits pulled out a cell phone and started recording me. "Hostile and uncooperative," he said aloud as he filmed. "This will be important for the case." "Case? What case?" I felt my jaw clench tight. They were trying to set me up Make me look violent so they could call the police or files a fake lawsuit. Not today. I took a deep breath, staying calm. You want a case? I said. Fine. You're about to get one. I pulled my own phone from my back pocket and started recording them right back. The men looked surprised. This is private property. I said, my voice steady. I have the legal deed. You've been warned to leave. You're now officially trespassing under state law. Anything you say or do will be recorded and turned over to the sheriff's office. The realtor's fake smile faltered, and one of the suits whispered something to her, but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. You'll regret this, she hissed. We'll see, I replied. They turned and left, but not before the realtor kicked over a flower pot by the porch, scattering dirt everywhere. I watched them leave, feeling the tension rise in my gut. It was only going to get worse from here, and I was ready for whatever came next. That night, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple over the fields, I sat on the porch again, my shotgun leaned against the wall next to me. I wasn't planning to use it, not unless I had to, but out here, miles from the nearest neighbor, you learn to be ready for anything. I had bought back the family ranch from my cousins when they wanted to sell it years ago, and I poured everything I had into restoring it. Every broken fence, every rusty tractor, every sagging barn door, I fixed it all with my own 2 hands, especially when greedy people thought they could take what wasn't theirs. I took a long sip of my coffee and stared out over the darkening land. Somewhere out there, the realtor was plotting her next move, and when she made it, I'd be waiting. This ranch wasn't just property. It was my home, my legacy, my life. No slick realtor or shady HOA was going to take it from me without a fight. But little did I know, the next time she showed up, she wouldn't come alone, and she wouldn't come empty-handed. 3 days passed without a word. I kept my usual routine, feeding the cattle at dawn, checking the fences, repairing anything that needed fixing, but the whole time I felt it, like a storm cloud hanging heavy over my head. I knew she wasn't done. Sure enough, late on the 3rd evening, just as the sun dipped low and the fields turned gold, I heard the rumble of engines. Not 1, not 2, 4 black SUVs rolled down my gravel driveway like a convoy. I stood up from my porch chair, squinting into the dust. Doors flew open, and at least a dozen people spilled out, some in suits, some in construction vests, some even carrying clipboards. And right there, in the middle of them, strutting like a queen bee, was her, the realtor. Only this time she wasn't screaming. She was smiling, a cold, smug smile that made my stomach twist. "Good evening, sir," she said sweetly. "We're here to begin the inspection." I laughed. I couldn't help it, a low, deep chuckle that rumbled out of me like distant thunder. "Inspection of what?" I asked. "Of my property," she said brightly. "Per the contract, we're authorized to inspect the premises before closing." Closing? Contract? This was insane. I hadn't sold anything. "You are trespassing," I said louder this time, making sure every single one of them heard it. "You've been warned before. Leave now." The suits ignored me. A few of the clipboard folks started walking toward the barn. A couple headed toward my cattle pens. I felt my blood pressure spike. They were trying to take inventory like they already owned the place, and if I laid a hand on any of them, they'd probably call the cops and claim assault. I grabbed my phone again and started filming. "You are illegally trespassing on private property," I said steadily into the camera. "You are not authorized to be here. I have not sold this land. You are violating the law." The realtor didn't even flinch. Instead, she pulled a thin piece of paper out of her bag and waved it in front of my face. "Your signature," she said smugly. "Right here." I snatched the paper and looked. It was a photocopy, and not even a good one. The signature on it looked nothing like mine. It was a cheap, sloppy forgery. "That's not my signature," I said firmly. She smirked. "Tell it to the judge." I stared at her for a Long moment. No fear, no hesitation, just pure greed shining in her eyes. It wasn't about mistakes anymore. This was a deliberate setup, a con, a scam, and if she thought I was going to roll over and let her steal my family's legacy, she was about to find out just how stubborn an old Army sergeant could be. I stepped back onto the porch, grabbed my old landline phone from inside the house, and called the sheriff's department. "I need officers out at the Walker Ranch," I said calmly. "Trespassers, about a dozen, might get ugly." The dispatcher promised someone would be on their way, but out here in the sticks, on the way, could mean 20 minutes or 2 hours. Meanwhile, these vultures were already stomping all over my land like they owned it. I set my coffee mug down, carefully on the railing, my hand steady as stone. "You've got 5 minutes," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "After that, you'll be dealing with more than just a trespassing charge." Some of them hesitated. The clipboard guys exchanged worried glances, but the Realtor barked at them to keep going. One of the construction guys even pulled out a measuring tape and started walking along the fence line. It was like watching termites devour a house, slow, methodical, and infuriating. But just as I was about to step off the porch and confront them again, I heard the first wail of sirens in the distance. Something caught my eye out near the cattle pens. A young ranch hand, a neighbor's kid I sometimes hired for odd jobs, was arguing with one of the suits. The suit was shoving him hard. The boy stumbled back against the fence, and then crack, the fence snapped. A section gave way, and the cattle, spooked by all the shouting and noise, burst through the gap in a thunder of hooves, charging straight toward the crowd. People screamed and scattered. Clipboards and hard hats went flying. SUVs were abandoned, with doors left swinging wide. The Realtor shrieked and dove behind her BMW as a big black bull, my old boy Tank, charged across the yard, snorting and bucking like a rodeo beast. I sprinted toward the barn, whistling sharply to try and calm the herd, but the damage was already done. Pure chaos exploded across the ranch like wildfire, and in the middle of it all sat the Realtor's brand-new BMW, right in the path of my angriest bull. Tank lowered his head and charged. I could only watch helplessly as my prize bull barreled toward her car like a living battering ram. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Would he slam into it and wreck the whole front end? Would they try to blame me for damages they caused by trespassing? The next second shattered that thought. Crash. Tank slammed full force into the side of the shiny white BMW, crumpling the door like it was made of tinfoil. The front wheel snapped sideways. The alarm started blaring, and the whole car rocked on its suspension like a boat in a storm. The Realtor shrieked again, scrambling out from behind the wreckage and running toward one of the black SUVs. Her heels snapped under her as she stumbled through the dirt. The rest of her crew wasn't doing much better. Some of the clipboard people sprinted straight into the fields, desperate to get away from the cattle, now stomping and mooing across the property. One of the suits even dove into a horse trough, sending water splashing everywhere. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so dangerous. I kept whistling, low and sharp, using the calls the cattle knew. Slowly, Tank and the others calmed down. They weren't mean animals, they were just scared by all the noise and strangers. After a few minutes, I managed to get most of them herded back behind the barn and closed the side gate. My heart was pounding like I'd just run a marathon, but my hands stayed steady. I wasn't young anymore, but 30 years in the Army teaches you how to handle chaos. Meanwhile, the Realtor and her crew huddled near their remaining vehicles, faces red, clothes dirty, shoes ruined, and the expensive perfume they'd worn earlier completely overwhelmed by the smell of dust, cattle, and fear. The perfume she wore was overpowered by the smell of dust, cow manure, and pure failure. I walked toward them slowly, taking my time, making sure they knew exactly who was in charge here. "You still want that inspection?" I asked, my voice calm but carrying clear across the yard. The Realtor opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Good. I stood there, arms crossed, as two sheriff's cruisers finally pulled up the driveway, sirens flashing. Took them long enough. Deputy Carter, a tall, wiry man I'd known for years, stepped out and surveyed the scene, his eyebrows shooting up when he saw the wrecked BMW, the busted fence, and the scattered group of well-dressed idiots trying to look innocent. "Evening, Hank," he said, giving me a small nod. "Evening, Carter," I replied, tipping my hat. "Got a little trespassing situation here." He turned to the Realtor. "Ma'am, can you explain what you're doing on Mr. Walker's property without permission?" She recovered quickly, too quickly. "This man is squatting on my land," she snapped. "I purchased this ranch. I have the paperwork." Deputy Carter glanced at me, and I nodded toward the house. "Deeds in the safe. Original copy. Been in my family since 1905. Carter sighed and turned back to the woman. "Ma'am, unless you have a court order, you're trespassing. And from the looks of it, you're causing property damage too." Her face flushed bright red. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "We'll leave." Deputy Carter raised an eyebrow. "You'll be leaving in a minute, sure, after we take statements. And after you clean up the mess you made." The clipboard guys muttered something about getting the lawyers involved, but Carter shut that down fast. "Lawyers can handle it later," he said sharply. "Right now you're facing misdemeanor trespassing charges, destruction of property, and possibly endangering livestock. You're lucky nobody got hurt." The Realtor's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Meanwhile, I just stood there quietly, arms folded, letting the law do its job. It took over an hour for the deputies to finish taking statements, writing reports, and warning everyone to stay off my land. Eventually, the trespassers piled into their remaining vehicles and drove off, leaving the wrecked BMW behind. Deputy Carter shook his head as he watched them go. "These city folks," he muttered, "think they can roll over people who actually built something." "Not this time," I said with a smile. He chuckled. "You'll probably want to get a lawyer, Hank." "Just in case?" "Already got one on speed dial," I said. "Thanks, Carter." He tipped his hat and drove off, his cruiser kicking up a cloud of dust down the long driveway. The ranch fell quiet again once they were gone, but the damage was already done. The front fence was busted, the flower beds were trampled, the cattle were skittish, and worst of all, I had a sinking feeling in my gut that this wasn't the end of it. That woman wasn't the type to take a loss and walk away. The next day, I spent fixing the fence with my ranch hand, Tyler, the same kid who'd nearly gotten bowled over during the trespass. "Sorry about all that, Mr. Walker," Tyler said, handing me a hammer. "I didn't mean to let them get to the cattle." I clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Wasn't your fault, son. They had no right being here in the first place." He nodded, looking a little less weighed down, and we worked until sunset, sweating under the heavy Texas sun. But even after all that hard labor, I didn't sleep easy. I sat out on the porch. Again, shotgun by my side, eyes sweeping the moonlit fields. The Realtor had made her move and failed, but if she was desperate enough to forge documents and bring a pack of goons onto my land, she wasn't going to quit now. No, she'd just get smarter, sneakier, and a hell of a lot more dangerous. Sure. Enough, just after midnight, I spotted headlights creeping down my driveway, slow this time, no roaring engines or flashing lights. Someone was trying to slip onto my property quietly, and they were bringing something big with them. I reached for my shotgun, heart steady, instincts kicking in sharp and clean. I stayed low behind a porch beam, barely daring to breathe, watching. Those headlights bobbed closer. The vehicle, a battered old white pickup, rolled to a stop about 30 yards from my barn. The headlights clicked off, plunging everything into darkness. Then the truck door swung open and 3 figures climbed out, dressed head to toe in black, flashlights aimed low to the ground. One of them grabbed a crowbar from the truck bed, and they made straight for my barn. Most people don't know it, but old ranch barns are built like fortresses. Thick wooden walls, heavy metal locks, reinforced beams, mine especially. I wasn't about to leave my tractors, hay supplies, and family heirlooms vulnerable to thieves or storms. But a crowbar and enough time could still cause plenty of damage. I thought about calling the sheriff, but the nearest station was almost 40 minutes away at this hour. By the time they showed up, these rats could be long gone, dragging my belongings with them, or leaving behind a mess I couldn't fix. I couldn't fix this easily. Not this time. I had to act fast. Slipping quietly back into the house, I set down the shotgun and unlocked the cabinet where I kept my old sidearm, my service pistol from my Army days, polished, cleaned, and loaded. I holstered it, grabbed a flashlight, and made my way around the house, keeping low behind trees and old fence lines until I was about 20 yards from the barn. The men were already at work on the lock, the metal groaning under the pressure of the crowbar. "Come on, hurry up," one of them hissed. "Get the door open before he wakes up." Too late for that. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the shadows, and swung my flashlight beam across them. "Freeze," I barked, my voice sharp and commanding, muscle memory from drill days kicking in. They jerked upright, the crowbar clanging to the ground. For a second, everything was still. "Step away from the door," I ordered, voice hard as steel. The tallest guy, about 40, made a stupid move. He lunged for the crowbar. Before he got anywhere close, I had my pistol trained right at his chest. I said, "Freeze," I growled. He stopped mid-lunge, hands going up slow. "Smart choice. You're trespassing on private property. Attempted breaking and entering. You're going to sit right there until the sheriff shows up." One of the others bolted toward the truck. "Bad idea," I said, swinging my flashlight and pistol in one clean move. "Take one more step and you'll be picking buckshot out of your... hide for a year." He froze, breathing heavy, hands trembling. Good. I edged toward the barn door, keeping all three in my sight, and kicked the crowbar farther away with my boot. "Who sent you?" I demanded. The tall one hesitated. The others glanced at each other, shifty and nervous. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally said, fake innocence dripping from every word. Liar. I didn't need a confession. I had them cold. All that mattered now was making sure they stayed put until help arrived. I backed them toward the front fence where a few old posts made a makeshift pen. "Sit," I ordered. They obeyed, eyes darting. I kept my pistol steady and dialed Deputy Carter directly. He answered groggily. "Carter," I said, my voice rough, "you're going to want to come back out to the Walker Ranch. I got 3 live ones. For you. Midnight barn raid." He groaned. "You're kidding." "Wish I was," I muttered. He cursed under his breath and promised he'd be there soon. I hung up and planted my boots firm in the dirt, standing sentry the way I had overseas. The night stretched out slow and thick, crickets chirping and an owl hooting somewhere down by the creek. The men stayed silent, but their eyes flickered with nervous calculation. These weren't just random thieves. This had been planned, organized, and I knew exactly who was behind it. The Realtor couldn't bully me off my land with fake papers, and she couldn't scare me with a bogus inspection, so now she was trying to wreck the place or steal something valuable. Maybe she figured if she caused enough damage, I'd get desperate and sell cheap. Over my dead body. Finally, after what felt like an hour, I saw the familiar flash of blue and red lights coming down the long dirt driveway. 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up, kicking dust into the cold night air. Deputy Carter and another deputy climbed out fast, weapons drawn but held low, scanning the scene. I raised my free hand and called out, "Got 'em sitting right here." Carter nodded, catching sight of the 3 men near the barn. "Caught 'em trying to crowbar the barn," I added. He approached with the cuffs ready. "Nice work, Hank. You ought to come out of retirement and join the force." I chuckled. "No thanks. Had enough trouble for one lifetime." They cuffed the men without a fuss and started loading them into the cruisers. Before he ducked into the back seat, the tall one turned and sneered at me. "You're going to lose anyway, old man. She always gets what she wants." I stared back, saying nothing. There it was, plain as day, the truth slipping from his mouth. No more pretending. He'd confirmed it. The Realtor had sent them. This wasn't just a legal fight anymore. This was a full-on war, and I was just getting started. After the deputies drove off, I stayed outside under the wide Texas sky for a long time, the Milky Way stretching across the heavens like a banner. I thought about my grandfather hammering fence posts into this soil with his bare hands, about my father breaking wild horses in the east pasture, about my mother canning peaches in the old kitchen that still carried a sweet scent whenever the weather warmed. This ranch wasn't just land, it was blood, family, honor, and I wasn't about to let some greedy outsider take it with dirty tricks and hired thugs. I spent the next few days fortifying the ranch even further. I installed security cameras on every building and gate, added solar-powered floodlights to every barn and outbuilding, and reinforced every door and lock. The old place started to look less like a farm and more like a fortress. Tyler helped me every spare hour he had. Good kid, understood what was at stake. We finished just as a heavy storm rolled in, dark clouds heavy with rain and lightning, flickering on the horizon. That evening, I stood on the porch watching the wind whip through the tall grass, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. But I should have known better. The Realtor wasn't finished yet. She was about to make her boldest, most outrageous move yet, something that would shake the entire county and force me into the biggest battle of my life. That night the storm hammered the ranch with sheets of rain and howling winds that rattled every loose window pane. I sat awake in my old rocking chair on the porch, shotgun across my lap, staring into the stormy darkness. Most folks would have been rattled after everything that had just happened with the midnight break-in. Not me. I wasn't scared, I was angry and more determined than ever. For 2 days straight, that fire burned in me, steady and fierce. After that, things stayed quiet for a while. Tyler helped me patch up a few more fences, and I met with my lawyer in town, handing over everything we had gathered. Photos of the trespassers, video recordings, the fake purchase agreement the Realtor had left behind. We were building a case, so solid even the slickest city attorney couldn't poke holes in it. But deep down, I knew this peace was only the calm before the next storm. Sure enough, it came late one afternoon while I was fixing the irrigation pump down by the creek. I heard a rumble coming down the main road, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and turned just in time to see a convoy of trucks, at least 6 of them, rolling onto the dirt road leading to my front gate. These weren't regular pickups either. They were big, white moving trucks stamped with a rental company's logo. I dropped my wrench and sprinted toward the house, heart pounding, instinct screaming. By the time I got there, the trucks were parked haphazardly in front of the locked gate, and there she was, the Realtor, wearing an even fancier business suit, heels stabbing into the mud, clipboard in hand, grinning like a wolf. Behind her stood at least a dozen movers in matching uniforms, already unloading dollies and moving carts. "What do you think you're doing?" I barked as I stormed up to the gate. She flipped her clipboard toward me like she was swatting a fly. "Eviction day," she said sweetly. "You've been served. We're here to clear the property for the new owners." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "New owners?" I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "Yes, sir," she said without blinking. "Your sale went through. Paperwork filed at the courthouse this morning." I gritted my teeth. "That paperwork is forged. You know it. I know it. My lawyer knows it. You're committing a felony." She just smiled wider. "I guess that's something for the courts to decide," she said smugly. "Meanwhile, we have the right to clear the property effective immediately." The movers started pushing carts loaded with boxes toward the gate. I stepped in front of it, planting my boots firmly in the mud. "Nobody crosses this fence," I growled. "Not while I'm breathing." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. "You can't stop us," she said, but her voice wavered. "Watch me," I said, pulling my phone from my vest pocket and dialing fast, not the sheriff this time. I called Jack Lawson, my lawyer, one of the best in the state, and an old buddy from my Army days. He picked up after 2 rings. "Jack," I said without preamble, "the vultures are here, claiming they're moving me out." "Stall them," Jack said sharply. I'm filing an emergency injunction right now. Don't let them touch a thing. If they do, they'll be liable for felony theft and destruction of property. I'll have a court order in your hands within the hour." I hung up and turned back to the Realtor. "You hear that?" I said. "Touch one piece of my property, and you're facing prison time." She opened her mouth to argue, but hesitated. Good. The movers shuffled awkwardly, looking back and forth between me and her. They weren't dumb. They didn't want any part of a felony charge. "Back in the trucks," she snapped at them. They obeyed, hauling the carts back into the trucks and slamming the doors. I stood there like a stone statue, shotgun slung over my shoulder, staring her down until she finally turned on her heel and stalked back to her shiny black SUV. But before she climbed in, she turned and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "You're going to lose," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "You can't fight the system." I didn't answer. I just stood there, letting the rain soak into my hat, my boots planted deep in the same mud my great-granddaddy once plowed with mules. I didn't need words. My land would speak for itself. Jack got the emergency injunction filed by sundown, and the Realtor was barred from setting foot on my property. The movers were sent packing. It was a win, a big one, but I wasn't stupid. Wins like that only made people like her angrier and more dangerous. I spent the next week reinforcing everything I could. Stronger locks, another layer of fencing, motion-triggered alarms around the barn and house. Tyler stayed over some nights, sleeping in the old guest room with his hunting rifle propped against the bed. We were ready, or so I thought, until the fire. It was about 2 a.m. when I smelled it, smoke thick and acrid seeping into my room through the old wooden floorboards. I bolted upright, heart hammering, as Tyler burst through my door. A second later, wide-eyed and coughing. "Barn's on fire!" he shouted. We grabbed the fire extinguishers, the hoses, anything we could, and raced outside. The sight made my knees buckle. The barn, the heart of the ranch, was an inferno, flames licking high, devouring the old wood faster than we could fight them. The cattle bawled in terror. Horses kicked and screamed against their stalls. We worked like madmen, dragging hoses, spraying water, beating back flames wherever we could, but it was no use. The barn was too far gone. All we could do was get the animals out and pray the fire didn't spread to the house. Tyler and I cut the horses loose, slapped the cattle into the safe pastures, and then stood helplessly as the barn collapsed in on itself with a roar like a dying dragon. Ash rained down around us like black snow. I sank to my knees in the mud, chest heaving, fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. Decades of memories, tools, old family saddles, tractors, heirlooms, all gone in minutes. And in my gut, I knew this wasn't an accident. Someone had set that fire on purpose. I didn't have proof, not yet, but I had a damn good idea who was behind it. As Tyler helped me to my feet, smoke and embers swirling around us, I made a silent promise to myself and to every ancestor who had ever bled for this land. They could burn my buildings, they could wreck my fences, but they would never take my spirit. I would rebuild, I would fight. And when the time came, I would make sure every last person responsible paid for what they did in full. But even as I stood there, breathing in smoke and grief, something worse was already on its way. The Realtor wasn't just coming for my land anymore. She was coming for me personally, and her next move would hit me where it hurt the most. The morning after the fire, the ranch felt hollow, the barn still smoldering, a pile of blackened beams and ash. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and wet dirt. Tyler and I worked from sunrise, salvaging what little we could, a few old horseshoes, a couple of rusted tools that hadn't melted. Everything else, the tractors, the heirloom saddles, even the hand-carved rocking chair my grandfather made, was gone. I didn't say much, neither did Tyler. We didn't have to. Grief hung heavy in the air, but anger burned hotter inside me. Someone had set that fire. I knew it. Tyler knew it. Even Deputy Carter, when he came to inspect the damage, knew it. Accelerant used, Carter confirmed grimly, crouching down to scoop some ash into a bag. Probably gasoline. Any witnesses? I asked, my voice flat, hard. He shook his head. Nobody saw anything. No cameras caught the road. He glanced up at me. You got any enemies, Hank? I let out a humorless laugh. Only one. Carter didn't push. He didn't have to. We both knew exactly who had motive, but proving it, that was going to be the hard part. And the Realtor wasn't done yet. Not even close. 2 days after the fire, I drove into town to meet with Jack Lawson again. Tyler stayed back to keep an eye on the ranch. We met at a small diner just off Main Street, neutral ground, safe. Jack slid a thick file across the table to me. Figured you should see this, he said quietly. Inside were copies of new court documents filed under my name, petitions, complaints, accusing me of neglect, of animal cruelty, of environmental violations. Every single one was a lie. They're trying to bury you in legal fees, Jack said grimly. Death by paperwork. I flipped through page after page, my stomach twisting. If enough accusations piled up, even false ones, it could trigger county investigations. Property seizures. It was dirty. It was underhanded. It was exactly the kind of move that woman would make. I closed the folder slowly. What do we do? I asked. Jack smiled slightly. We fight, same way you fought every battle your whole life. We document everything. We answer every claim. We countersue for harassment, fraud, trespassing, arson, you name it. He leaned closer. But Hank, it's going to get worse before it gets better. I nodded once. I already knew. I shook his hand, thanked him, and left the diner, heading back toward the ranch. The drive felt longer than usual. The Texas sun beat down hard. The road shimmered like silver rivers, and my truck's old engine growled under the strain. As I turned down the dirt road to my ranch, I spotted something that made my heart stop. Tyler's pickup was parked by the gate, driver's door open, but Tyler was nowhere in sight. I slammed my brakes and jumped out, calling his name. No answer. I ran toward the house, instinct screaming now, every nerve on high alert. The front ductor was hanging open, swinging slightly in the hot wind. Inside, furniture was overturned, chairs broken, papers scattered. Someone had been here, and they hadn't come just to scare me. They had come to send a message. I moved carefully from room to room, pistol drawn, checking every corner and every shadow. Empty. It wasn't until I reached the old study that I found it. A single piece of paper taped to the wall, written in thick black marker. Sell or else. The letters were jagged, angry, rushed. My fists clenched around the edges of the paper until they crumpled. Tyler. Where was Tyler? I ran outside again, heart hammering in my ears, shouting his name. Finally, from the woods behind, the barn ruins, I heard a faint, broken shout. I sprinted toward the sound, crashing through brambles and brush. And there he was, tied to a tree, bruised, cut, but alive. I fell to my knees, ripping the ropes away with trembling hands. You okay, son? I asked, voice raw. He nodded, weakly, coughing. They jumped me, Mr. Walker, he said. Said to give you a message. I got it, I said grimly. I helped him up and carried him back toward the house. Whoever did this wasn't just trying to steal my land anymore. They were sending a warning, a threat, and they were willing to hurt innocent people to get what they wanted. I called Deputy Carter again. This time, there was no hesitation. Ambulances, deputies, even an investigator from the state trooper's office. They all came, swarming the ranch. Pictures were taken, statements recorded, evidence bagged. Tyler was taken to the hospital for a checkup. He'd have some bruises, but thank God, nothing broken. Meanwhile, I stood on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in bloody reds and deep bruised purples. Enough was enough. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was defending my people, my family, my honor. I swore right then and there I wouldn't just defend the ranch. I would go on the offensive. I would hunt down every last person responsible for this and make sure they answered for it. Not just in court, not just with money, with everything they had. Because when you back a soldier into a corner, you better be ready for what comes next. And I was just getting started, but before I could strike back, the realtor made one final, desperate move, one that would put everything I loved on the line. And this time, she wasn't coming alone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch, shotgun across my lap, watching the road, waiting. I knew she was coming. The realtor wasn't the type to back off after a failure. She had thrown everything at me, legal tricks, fake papers, midnight raids, even arson and threats, but she still hadn't gotten what she wanted. And desperate people do desperate things. As the first gray fingers of dawn stretched across the sky, I saw it. A line of SUVs, pickup trucks, and rental vans rolling slow down the dirt road toward my ranch gate. At least 20 vehicles. The realtor's black SUV led the pack. Behind her came security guards in tactical gear, movers, clipboard-waving agents, even a couple of men in dark suits that screamed corporate lawyers. This wasn't a sneak attack. This was a full-on invasion. I stood up slowly, cracking my stiff knees, and walked out to the gate. I didn't bring the shotgun. This time, I didn't need a weapon. I had something stronger, the truth. I had prepared for this moment. Every camera I installed was recording, every document was backed up, every inch of my land was secured. This time, they wouldn't just lose, they'd be exposed. The convoy rolled to a stop a few yards from the gate. The realtor got out first, dressed in a crisp white suit that practically glowed in the morning light. She marched toward me, high, heels sinking into the dirt, a fat manila envelope clutched like a weapon in her hand. "This is your final notice," she snapped, thrusting the envelope out. "You are illegally occupying corporate-owned property. If you do not vacate immediately, we will remove you by force." I didn't move. I just stared at her. "You done?" I asked quietly. She sneered. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "Old man!" Behind her, the suits fanned out, speaking into radios, security guards adjusting their belts, movers rolling dollies toward my fence. It was a well-oiled machine, a machine built to crush people like me. I smiled. "Funny thing about machines," I said. "They break easy when you know where to hit them." I nodded toward the road behind her. Engines roared from both ends of the ranch road. Trucks rolled in, big, heavy-duty ones. Some from neighboring ranchers, others from friends in town. Dozens of them, old beat-up Fords, shiny new Chevys, even a few retired sheriff's patrol trucks still painted black and white. They surrounded the realtor's convoy in seconds, boxing them in completely. The realtor spun around, confusion flashing across her face. "What is this?" she shrieked. I tipped my hat. "Friends," I said. "Family, community." One by one, the truck. Doors swung open and people stepped out. Old ranchers in worn denim, veterans in camo hats, young families, retired sheriffs, even Tyler fresh out of the hospital, leaning on a crutch but grinning from ear to ear. They stood firm, arms crossed, glaring at the invaders. The message was clear. "If you want Hank Walker's ranch, you'll have to go through all of us." The realtor's face turned redder than a sunset. "This is illegal," she screamed. "I'll have you all arrested." I laughed, a deep, genuine belly laugh that rattled the air around us. "Funny you mention arrests," I said. Just then, 3 more vehicles rolled in, county sheriff cruisers with lights flashing. Deputy Carter stepped out, followed by the county investigator and 2 officers from the state fire marshal's office. They marched right up to the realtor. "Ma'am," Carter said, flipping open a leather folder, "you are under arrest for arson, conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false documents, trespassing, and assault." The realtor's mouth dropped open. "You can't!" she shrieked. "I'm a real estate professional." Carter just smiled grimly. "You're a criminal," he said, "and your little army here, they're accomplices." He motioned to the suits and security guards, and one by one officers started cuffing them. The crowd of townsfolk erupted in cheers, the sound rolling across the fields like thunder. I stood there, arms folded, as they loaded her into the back of a cruiser. She twisted in her seat, snarling at me through the window. "This isn't over," she screamed. I tipped my hat again. "Yeah," I said. "It is." The cruisers pulled away, leaving the rest of us standing in the morning sun, free, victorious, home. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Investigators dug deep into the Realtor's records. Turned out she was part of a crooked network of developers trying to force old landowners to sell cheap. They had forged documents, burned down barns, threatened families. But thanks to the evidence Tyler and I gathered, and the testimony of brave neighbors, they all faced serious prison time. The courts returned full ownership rights to me without a shadow of doubt. My ranch was safe, my name cleared, my legacy protected. That fall we rebuilt the barn. Townsfolk showed up with lumber, nails, and hammers. Some brought food, others brought music. It wasn't just a barn raising, it was a celebration, a declaration that no matter how slick or powerful the enemy was, you don't mess with a man's home. You don't mess with a community built on honor, family, and hard work, and you sure as hell don't mess with a stubborn old Army sergeant who's got nothing left to lose but his pride. Now I sit back on my porch again, coffee steaming, in my cup watching the sun rise over fields of gold. The cattle graze quietly. The horses trot lazily by the creek. The wind sings through the new barn rafters, peace hard-earned, paid for with sweat, fire, and the iron will of a man who refused to be broken. And if anyone ever tries to come for my ranch again, they'll find out the same thing the Realtor did. This land doesn't just belong to me, I belong to it, and together we're unstoppable.